Hey, I'm Damon, and on this channel we usually talk about the intersection between leftist politics and the Christian tradition, and we talk a lot about liberation theology, or at least from the perspective of liberation theology. Even when I'm not letting you know that we're doing some liberation theology, I usually am. And the key slogan of liberation theology when it was developed by Latin American bishops in the 1960s was the preferential option for the poor. And we're going to break down in this video what that means. Also, we need to talk a bit about the coronavirus. And for those who kind of get what I'm talking about immediately, you probably already see the connections. If not, don't worry, we're going to make the connections soon. But first of all, the most basic definition of liberation theology is interpreting the Christian faith from the perspective of the poor and the oppressed. And the main founder of liberation theology, the Peruvian priest Gustavo Gutierrez, said, "I do theology as one who comes from a context of deep poverty. And thus, for me, the first question of theology is, how do we say to the poor, God loves you?" So liberation theology started in Latin America in the 1960s because the Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965 called for spiritual renewal in the Catholic Church in response to the needs of the modern world. So there was a series of conferences of bishops all over the world discussing how to meet the demands of Vatican II, and a lot of them were responding to their context of modern pluralism. But the context for the bishops in Latin America were quite different, and it sounded more like this. Here's a quote from the 1968 conference in Medellin, Colombia. They said, "The Latin American bishops cannot remain indifferent in the face of the tremendous social injustices existent in Latin America, which keep the majority of our peoples in dismal poverty, which in many cases becomes inhuman wretchedness. A deafening cry pours from the throats of millions of our people, asking their pastors for a liberation that reaches them from nowhere else." And so, the central slogan from those conferences, of course, was the preferential option for the poor. They said, God does choose sides, and God chooses the side of the poor and the oppressed. And that's clear throughout the whole Bible as well. So, if God makes a preferential option for the poor, then the church should make a preferential option for the poor, opting for the poor, giving preferential favor to the poor. And when we're talking about how to achieve justice, we need to make a preferential option for the poor. Because here's the thing, injustice also makes a preferential option for the poor. Injustice gives preferential favor to the poor. And we're even seeing that with the coronavirus right now. And we see that with all pandemics and diseases. Diseases themselves make a preferential option for the poor. Poor people are at a higher risk of dying prematurely, both because they live in areas where they're at higher risk of being exposed to pathogens, and because they're not able to afford resources that keep them healthy, or that can help them when they become terribly unhealthy. Of course, plenty of poor people have no health care, or if they do, horrible health care. Who's being talked about when these right-wing politicians say that plenty of people are happy with their health care? Who's happy with their health care? Come on. In all parts of the world and throughout all history, the poor are more sick than the non-poor. That can't be ignored. And we're seeing that especially being exposed right now, even hearing the way that the news gives advice to people to stay safe from the coronavirus, saying things like people should avoid large crowds, and people should stockpile foods in case they become quarantined, and people should stay home from work, and if they start to become sick, contact your doctor. But hey, low-income people can't follow that advice, buddy. Low-income workers and poor people in general are the most vulnerable to all this. Not being able to afford testing and not being able to afford treatment and not being able to afford to just stop working. So many workers, and also homeless people, elderly people, incarcerated people, immigrants, and other marginalized groups will bear the most impact. So for me, liberation theology isn't just like a cool theology that you can choose like fandoms. It seems to be the only option if we're trying to survive here. Kind of like how plenty of people say socialism is the only option, especially when it seems like the alternative is barbarism, when the alternative is death. And like I said, if injustice chooses to give preferential favor to the poor, then our actions for justice should also choose to give preferential favor to the poor. That's what matters. I so wish so many people could get that. Also, a lot of people have to realize the only reason liberation theology even had to develop as a distinct theological tradition is because a large part of the church has forgotten its radical origins in favor of a comfortable Christianity that perpetuates injustice by accepting the status quo and siding with power again and again, and just simply being global capitalism disguised in a priestly robe. And the more you get into liberation theology, the more you start to feel like, oh, this is just basic theology. This is just basic Bible reading. This is just basic Christianity 101. I've had that experience, and I've heard plenty of other people who are into liberation theology say the same thing happened to them. And of course, you so badly wish other Christians saw it that way too. And I think in times of crisis like we're in right now, people start to be more open to other ways of talking about justice. So let's all be open, because the old methods of achieving justice that have been given to us by our current system are not working. So there's my basic rundown of the concept of the preferential option for the poor and liberation theology. Of course, I could talk for hours and go way deeper on this stuff, but I want to keep this video short. Also, go check out my Goodreads link in the description. I got some bookshelves set up on my Goodreads, and one of them is for liberation theology. So if you want to read some more, go check that out. And of course, subscribe to my channel so you could see me talk about all this stuff and other topics. And also, go follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/whoisdamon, where we can talk about this stuff in a more free-form and interactive way. Also, go join our new Discord. A bunch of other people talking about this stuff. Bunch of cool people on there. And if you want to support me, I'd greatly appreciate it. You could support me on patreon.com/Damon Garcia. Also got a whole bunch of exclusive videos on there, so you'd enjoy them. And shout out to all my patrons already over there: Stephen Harp, James Finley, Keegan James, Keith Wetzel, Kristen Mouse, Marina Black, Mike Togman, Mimi McGann, New Transcendentalist, Onion, Peter John Blake, Ranger Jenny, Refined Your Scene, Sam Osakwe, and everyone else. Appreciate you all so much. Thanks for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. By the way, this goatee decision was kind of a mistake. I messed up in trimming, and this is my only choice. I'm going to let the rest grow back out, because you're not a real leftist if you don't have facial hair, right?